I love a podcast.
Yeah, like you, because I know like audiobooks and podcasts. Yeah. And if I can ask, Abby, how did you even sort of like get into them, or like how, where do you use them? And
I have no idea. It's my answer.
Good answer. All right, on to the next question.
The show's over.
Welcome to Hallway Conversations. We're a trio of educators who have plenty of questions about teaching and learning and school culture, and we believe in the value of reflection and collaboration as we seek to keep growing as teachers. This podcast is our place for thinking out loud together about issues in education and why they might matter to Christian educators. Welcome to the conversation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 96th episode of the Hallway Conversations podcast. 96, friends.
You guys.
It's a lot.
That's not nothing. All right. My name's Matt Beamers.
I'm Abby DeGroat.
And I'm Dave Mulder.
And this is our 96th episode. Woo! Friends, we are always looking for topics of conversation and feedback, so please email us or send us a recording of your question to hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. That's hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. We're looking for relevant and timely ideas, so please let us know if you have a show topic ruminating around in your head. Friends who are listening, you need to know we are recording this on a Friday afternoon at the end of our...
It is a Friday afternoon.
It is a Friday afternoon, and it's the end of the first week of school. And
first full week.
Yeah. We're not...
Second week.
Yes, that's right.
Good
first
catch.
Full week, second week of school.
Because we taught on Labor Day.
That's right, we did.
Let's just establish that.
Yes, we taught on the Monday of Labor Day.
Let it be
known.
known.
Teach a full week this week.
He who has an ear, let him hear that we taught on Labor Day. Anyways, we digress. We're a little punchy this afternoon. Dave, I believe we have a question from a listener.
So this is a fun one. Some of you may remember I've mentioned on the podcast before, I have a newsletter that comes out every 2 weeks, and this one actually came in response to the newsletter, but it's from a podcast listener, so I love that. So this is from Mike, and he said, I'm a regular listener to the podcast, and I look forward to this upcoming season of episodes. Well, thanks, Mike, and here we are. You mentioned in your newsletter your enjoyment of podcasts while biking or walking your dog. Would you be willing to share your library of favorites on the podcast sometime? That's really great. So I brought this to you guys. It's I know we all have moments where we're listening to podcasts, and so Mike, this is the one for you. We're gonna share out some of our ideas.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Mike. Hey, before we answer this, though, Dave, we might have some new listeners or even some veteran listeners. Can you just talk about your newsletter for a second?
Sure.
Because I just don't want to forget that, and I know it comes as a great encouragement to a lot of readers. So can you just, before we delve into podcasts, can we delve into newsletters?
Happy to share about it. So thanks for asking. So it's called Positivity, Passion, and Purpose, and that really is the intent of it for people who are serving in education. Sometimes we just need a boost of positivity or a jolt of passion or
I feel like those are three good descriptors of you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But that really is kind of what it is. So it comes out every 2 weeks. If you subscribe, I'll put a link to it in the show notes if you're interested. And it just comes as every other Wednesday. On the off weeks of the podcast, I have a newsletter instead. So, I usually have a reflection that gets at either positivity or passion or purpose. And sometimes we just need a kick in the pants, I think, to keep doing that. And then I always have some random things that I'm loving right now that I share. And so, like the most recent one, fresh tomatoes from my dad's garden, because, oh my goodness, he planted 12 tomato plants, you guys. And we have tomatoes coming out our ears, which I love.
And me too, and I'm sick of them.
Oh, okay.
So I've just stopped picking them. That's my new...
Oh, you need a recipe.
I know.
Yeah.
Something.
It's good. Anyway, and then I always try to close with some kind of word of blessing or encouragement at the end of it. We need that nudge.
Yeah, thanks. We really encourage you subscribe to that, and Dave, maybe we can put a link to the newsletter in the show notes from today's podcast. Well, I'm gonna start with a real confession here, folks. Like, this is a really intriguing question to me, but I actually want to I feel like I need to confess this. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts. Like, I know that I should. Like, I don't listen. Don't
shoot on yourself.
No,
here,
I know, but
It's not a should thing.
No, but sometimes it feels like, because there is, and I'll be like, because there's so many good conversations. You hear friends around here talking about podcasts.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you feel like, I wish I could participate more. Yeah. That's the should side of it, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I've tried it, and it's not that I don't at all. It's like I've tried audiobooks.
Yep.
And I just still love reading them. And it's not because it's like, and I've tried it and I've done it.
Yep.
shout out to Justin Bailey. I listened to your book on audiobook, and it was a wonderful way to drive to Fargo, North Dakota.
There you go.
And it was.
Right.
But generally speaking, even when I walk, I consciously choose not to put earbuds in my ear, just because for me it's actually my one time I really try to unplug. So I do have a few that I'll share, but
Sure.
I just want to say I feel like I'm not behind, whatever the language is.
Yeah.
It is not part of my regular practice to listen to podcasts or audiobooks. So I'll share in a bit, but I'm just going to start with that. So what are one of you who are better equipped?
I love a podcast.
Yeah, like you, because I know like audiobooks and podcasts.
Yeah.
And if I can ask, Abby, how did you even sort of like get into them, or like how, where do you
That's a good
use
question.
them? And
I have no idea. It's my answer.
good answer. All right, on to the next
And the
question.
show's over. No. I can't remember how long I've been listening to podcasts. I think the first one I ever listened to was Revisionist History by Malcolm Gladwell.
Oh, such a good
Okay.
one.
That was how I got into podcasts, and it's still one of my favorites. And he does a ton of seasons. Malcolm Gladwell is a prolific nonfiction author,
Yep.
and he just makes such great connections between and among things. I know,
Yes.
Dave, you've listened
do,
to
yeah.
Revisionist. Matt, have you ever listened to
I
Revisionist
have. I
History?
actually have it. It's one of the. It's
Yeah.
one of the ones, and I actually
Yeah.
got it from both of you.
Yeah. And so a lot of it is historical, but it's also like, I don't know, he does good research. He just did one on the starvation experiment from
Yes.
Minnesota. Did you listen to that whole
was
deal?
upsetting, actually.
It was upsetting, but it was fascinating.
Totally.
And like the questions that it brings up about what we can consent to as
Right.
humans and
Right.
as subjects, and
The current season is all around gun control. And
I haven't listened to
it's
that
a
yet.
hot topic. So
Okay.
a couple episodes are out in the latest season, and I think it's going to be a 6-episode series in
Okay.
this season about gun control. And it's always thoroughly researched, and I mean it's often things that you think you know the story, but you don't really know the whole story.
right,
about,
right, like the things that make you go, huh? Yeah. So that's when I started listening, and then I just found and branched out. And I also listen to audiobooks quite often, mostly because when I was doing my doctoral work, I just didn't have time to read anything else for pleasure, right? And so when I drive, then that's when I can listen
Sure.
to books or to podcasts.
I think I heard both of you talk about revisionist history, and this was now a while ago, but I feel like the first episode I listened to about that was something about watering golf courses in
that's a
California.
good episode.
I know, and I was
So
sort of
good.
like,
Yeah.
wow, this was way. So that was actually one of the first podcasts I ever listened to. Was like that one.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I found that fascinating. So yeah, I don't know. So thank you for that. So that there's one
That's
I do
great.
listen to occasionally. How about you, Dave? Do you
man.
sort of remember your entry into it, or just
Yeah.
when all of a sudden it's like when you switch maybe from like, oh, like it's not just music I have to listen to. Like
Right.
there's other things out there.
So I stumbled into this because when I first got an iPhone, I had the podcast app on my phone, and I remember like I'd heard of podcasts before that, and so this is, I don't know, 10
it
years
had
ago
to
or so.
be, that had to be when I started listening too.
Yeah.
When I got an iPhone, which
Right.
was after 2012 sometime.
Yeah.
So last 10 years.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I just started looking through the podcast app, and it recommended some things, and so I clicked on a couple that just piqued my interest. And so one of the first ones I started listening to is called Stuff You Should Know. Which, if you know me, is kind of right up my alley, right?
Yes.
Like, oh, I like to know things. And it's like, this is all the stuff you should know. And it's not I don't know, they take topics that sound super boring on the face of it, and then they like just, the hosts, they do some research on it, and then they just talk for half an hour to an hour on this topic, whatever it is. And so it's like, how stars work. And you're like, that sounds super boring on the face of it, and then you actually listen to it, and it's like, that's kind of fascinating, actually. And it's a lot of that kind of stuff. So that was the first one for me.
You need to. Can I just, as an aside, I really want to encourage you to be on Jeopardy someday because no, like I feel like you need to try out at least because you know a lot of stuff about important stuff. But you also know more stuff about nothing. Like, you know...
I know a lot of trivia.
This is a little diversion, Dave. I'll let you edit this out or not. But I once was at a trivia at a local establishment with Dave Mulder at my table. and I was with
Did you
my
dominate?
wife. No, listen.
That's so funny.
So first of all, they started asking questions, and Bev and I like to think we're okay at trivia. We were there for 2 hours. Bev and I answered 2 questions, and we got it both wrong. And Dave got them both right, and then we were like, we are way out of our league. So that was the thing. Like, it was like I know I can speak in hyperbole sometimes, but I can honestly say I've never seen anything like it.
That's awesome.
After all, Bev and I were kicking each other under the table because we were like, we wanted to laugh so hard. We're like, he knows so much useless information.
It's totally that.
And it was
just
unbelievable.
The stupid knowledge that
And
nobody cares about.
then the peak of that was, and this can maybe only happen at a bar in Sioux Center, they had a whole category on 1990s Christian music.
That's a great category.
Yeah, totally.
so good,
But you're not going to find that in Minneapolis
No, you're not.
or Vancouver or Toronto.
No, I bet you dominated.
And no, like that's not even the right word, Abby. Like they would play 3, like Vaughn, our friend Vaughn was doing, and he played 3 notes of it. And it wasn't just that, that's jars of clay. And that's not just jars of clay, that like flood. It's 3 notes in, and this guy is singing along to every song. He was singing along to like, there was groups, like I remember like Delirious, crushed it. Michael W. Smith, gone. Striper, Petra, destroyed. Like the words,
Deep cuts.
it was unbelievable. Anyways,
Dave knows a lot of things from his podcast.
Hey, this is stuff you should know.
Anyways, and that's a total sidetrack, but people need to know if you're ever playing trivia and you need
You want
someone,
Dave on your team.
Thanks,
you
guys.
don't want Matt and Bev on your team. You want Dave on your team. Anyways, sorry.
No, it's
Noted.
That's great.
Digress.
That's a good time.
That's a hard right turn on a Friday
that's
afternoon.
okay. That's okay.
So
How do we recover?
stuff you need to know. Stuff Dave Mulder needs to know is one of Dave. How about another podcast?
Oh man. Okay, so I'm going to pull up my podcast app here. I have one that I stumbled into early in the COVID lockdown season. Was when I started listening to this one. I saw it advertised online, and so I just clicked on it and went. And it's called the 10-Minute Bible Hour. And the 10-Minute Bible Hour. So Matt Whitman is the host. He's a former pastor and turned podcaster, and he does deep dives into Scripture. And so for 3 years, we went through the book of Matthew, 10 minutes every day. And it took us 3 years to get through the book of Matthew, 10 minutes a day. And so it's like in the morning while I'm brushing my teeth and shaving, I'm listening to the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast.
Cool.
And it has just been such a good spiritual practice, even for me, to just know like there's a community of people listening into this, and we're all kind of thinking and grappling together. And then there's a whole online community where they talk about the podcast if people are into that. And if not, that's fine. You can just listen, and it's about 10 minutes a day. So we did the book of Matthew. We're currently in the book of Esther, and same kind of thing, 10 minutes a day. And we've been going months on the book of Esther. It's really cool.
Good.
I like that one. How about you, Matt?
Yeah, I'll say another one that so my daughter Annika put me onto this one. She's a big fan of John and Hank Green.
Yeah.
And so they have one called the Anthropocene Review. And again, I'm just laughing at it because so they had one that was like on just listen to these and they're only like 20-30 minutes left or 20 minutes long, but one's called Hawaiian Pizza and Viral Meningitis. And like I'll just let that. All right. Another one is like Googling strangers in Kentucky bluegrass, Haley's Comet and cholera, Canada geese and Diet Dr. Pepper, and my daughter's like, you got to listen to this. And I was looking at these titles and I'm like, this is either going to be brilliant or like this is just going to scare me, and it's brilliant actually. So the Anthropocene Review, and for me, it's a bit like I found Revisionist History, like I said, even the golf course one that was my entry into. I found it fascinating, but also sort of delightful.
Yeah.
And the Anthropocene Review, the same thing. I was like, wow, like what a deep dive on Diet Dr. Pepper,
right.
and you're like, and who knew? And yet so fascinating. And as I was listening, I found it delightful. And I think that's sort of a theme for me when I do listen to podcasts. Is like I don't want it to be like a little bit of silliness, like I want to laugh a little, but I also do a bit like you. It's like, wow, like who knew there was so much about Diet Dr. Pepper or Canada Geese. So
Yeah.
it helps my learning, but it also brings a bit of joy to my day.
Yeah.
Abby, how about you?
Yeah.
Another one?
The next one I'm going to mention, I can't remember how I found her, but Kate Bowler is an author. She's a Duke theologian.
Okay.
She was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer and is in remission now. And she wrote a book on her experience with that, with people kind of giving her platitudes in the Christian life. And so her book is called Everything Happens. But it's like a play on people saying everything happens for a reason, right? She hates all of the self-help and I hate cliches, hate them.
I've never noticed that about you.
Hate them.
Yeah.
It's
English
one of
teacher
the
problems.
things that I cannot stand.
Yeah.
Their whole Facebook's phrases that I wish I could ban from existence
Wow. So you have
forever.
strong
I have a
feelings.
list. Yeah. It's written down.
I want to do a podcast just on...
Yeah.
We should.
What?
I will bring it.
Okay, you'll bring
I will
it
bring the
on.
list.
Yeah.
Anyways,
schedule
so that appeals to me, but she really talks about one of her catchphrases is living your okayest life now, right? Instead of your best life, and just kind of dismantling that really lie that everything should be wonderful and life is hard and beautiful.
Yeah.
And two things are true. And so she just interviews people. I just listened yesterday to her new season. She just had Jenna Bush Hager on, which I found was fascinating. She interviews really cool people. Kwame Alexander, she had on last season, who's an author and prolific. Cool. So she just interviews really interesting people about how life is hard and good. Yeah. Really is kind of the best way I can plug it. But she's delightful. Yeah. So it's one of my favorite. It's called Everything Happens.
Everything Happens.
Yeah, Kate Bowler.
Yeah. It's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Dave, how about you? A second go-to or favorite?
So I have a list that I kind of rotate through. I'm going to give you a 3-4 here on this one. So I one of the few subjects I have not taught is social studies, but I love social studies. And so I have 3 very different social studies podcasts that I listen to. I guess I would call them social studies podcasts. One of them is called Freakonomics. And so it's an economics podcast, but it's the economics of things that you would not think have anything economics related about them. And it's absolutely, utterly fascinating. So I would recommend that one. The second one that I'll mention is a history podcast. It's called The Last Archive. Similar to Revisionist History in some ways, except this is a Harvard historian. I cannot think of her name right now. It'll come to me as soon as we're done recording. But she takes what seems to be unrelated things and finds ways to connect them and just unpacks them in really interesting ways. So one season was Who Killed Truth? And kind of how did we get to the culture that we find ourselves in? And so it's historical analysis. And then the third is called Up First, and this is my current events podcast. And so also a daily podcast. It's from NPR. It's about 10 minutes every day, and it's just 3 news stories. They always have a national, international, and a human interest story every day. And it just kind of helps me know kind of what's the big deal in the world. I like NPR because they're pretty middle of the road, maybe slightly left of center politically, but they give you just the facts. It is very much not giving a lot of commentary. It's this is what's happening in the world that you should know about today. So those are 3 I appreciate a lot.
Yeah, I think one of my favorites is by a good friend of ours, Justin Bailey, teaches in the theology in all things podcast. I'd say this is probably one that I don't miss. And I even just reading the description of it, I just really appreciate. I think this gets at it. It says that they host conversation with diverse voices about living creatively in God's created world. And I just love that idea. Justin talks a lot about the imagination and creativity. And I think, what does it mean to be a faithful presence in today's culture? And how do you do that hospitably? How do you do that creatively? And so I just really appreciate his insights around cultural engagement and just, living faithfully and being a faithful presence. So, and I just, he always interviews authors, and I just Karen Swallow Pryor. He interviewed the local band, the Ruralists, which I found really beautiful. Alan Noble about his new book, Getting Out of Bed, and so there's just been I have just found it really encouraging. Just to listen to that, and again, because I just think a lot about it does take imagination and creativity, to be a faithful presence in today's culture. So
a lot of deep thinkers.
A lot of deep thinkers, but I also like, and these are just small things. Like I always appreciate his introduction before it starts, and it just is like words of encouragement. And so yeah, I just really appreciate. I come away challenged and encouraged each time. Like I to think differently about things, but also to be encouraged where I'm at, and just take the long view as we continue to engage the world that we live in.
That's good.
Abby, a chance for one more, maybe?
One of the ones that I really appreciate is called Pantsuit Politics, which is two women who, they're both lawyers, and they went to college together and then met up again later in life, and were on very different sides of the aisle politically, and decided that they were going to have a podcast with a different approach to the news that was nuanced, and that where they would listen to each other. And it's evolved since then. But they go through, again, different news stories. They sometimes do summer series, deep dives into, like, infrastructure or different interesting things that are going on in the country. One of them had a child diagnosed with type 1 about a year ago, so there's some content there that I enjoy. But they just really... I learn a lot from them, and I appreciate their approach to differences and disagreements politically, and I think I learn a lot from them that way. So that's one I listen to most often. And then I also have to plug my favorite book podcast, because, there had to be one the list. Right? Anne Bogle, who's kind of like the book... I don't know, like she puts out a summer list that always like gets people reading, but she has a podcast called What Should I Read Next? And it's a great way for me to find things that I want to read, where she interviews people, or people write in and say, this is what I like. So she'll interview them and say, well, tell me something you've read that you've liked. And then she'll suggest other things based on that. She's done like travel series. Like if you're going to Italy, you should read these books or things like that. And it's a great way for me to find things that I want to read.
That's great. Okay, I got one more I'm going to share. This one is a very weird podcast. I don't know how else to describe it. It's called 99% Invisible. And it's all about design. Wow. Like aesthetics and design, and the idea being good design is 99% invisible. Like if you notice it, that's bad design. Yeah. Right. And so it takes.
Don't come into my office. You will notice everything.
But it gets at these really weird things that you never would really think about, like why? Oh, I guess somebody designed it that way, right? And they had this lovely episode about traffic lights. And like, why do we put red on the top and green on the bottom? And like, is there a good reason for that? Well, okay, to standardize it, sure. But then they get into like the history of traffic lights and how did we get to the point where we have traffic lights? I listen to these weird podcasts, you guys. No wonder I get this.
Fascinating.
Like, right? Yeah. But I really love it. And every week, it's Roman Mars who hosts it. I don't know if you know him. He's got like the perfect voice for radio, for podcasts. So it's just like so soothing to listen to. And then they find these weird creative stories. And it's just delightful every time I listen.
And this is why you're so good at trivia.
Apparently.
Right? I would say, the last couple that I'm looking at are mostly, just around some of my hobbies. I like being Canadian. I know it's a stereotype to love hockey, but I really love hockey. And so there's not much hockey news to be found in the middle of Iowa. And so I've got a...
You don't say.
Yeah, so just one. It's called 32 Thoughts, just with a couple of guys, Elliot and Jeff. And I just appreciate it because it's pretty short. It just kind of keeps me tied in a bit to that conversation. Sure. Even just with some of my nephews back home, just they're big hockey fans, and so it's one way to kind of stay connected with them. And then I'm a really, really bad golfer, but I really, really like golf. And so I just listen to, it's called the No Laying Up podcast. And that's really an escape podcast. It makes me laugh. There's some edgy language on it. So if you do listen to it, fair warning about that. But it's just, again, I think like even when I think about that podcast or even some of the ones you cited, it makes me realize like, one of the themes is sort of like we're drawn to these podcasts where people really take a different angle at things, like to think about things. Like even I was really struck by you shared about this woman who was diagnosed with stage 4, right? And just even how out of that kind of came like this realization around cliches and then talking about them like a kind of a different angle on it, right? Or even you around design or And I think, like, I'm drawn, like, I think that's why if I think about the Anthropocene Review, it's probably my favorite podcast, just simply because they're talking about ideas that we've all talked about, you know, like pineapple on your pizza, right? And just really, like, coming at it in a humorous but different angle. And I think that's the joy, even though I don't listen to them often. The ones I do find is, like, people who can just find a different in and share different things like that.
Absolutely. That's really good.
Friends, we know that your time is valuable, and I want to thank you for joining us today on our podcast for another hallway conversation. And whether it's this day, this week, this month, or this school year, we hope the Lord gives you what you stand in need of. And we'd like to send you from here with this blessing. So to our listeners, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace and give you peace and give you peace. Amen. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we hope you have a good week.
This podcast was literally dreamed up during one of our actual hallway conversations. Our music is by Ethan Mulder. Hallway Conversations is created and produced by Matt Beamers, Abby DeGroat, and Dave Mulder. Hey, we have a favor to ask of you. Would you be willing to rate this podcast or write a review in your podcast app? Or if you found this conversation interesting or helpful, would you consider sharing it on your social media? Those things really do help podcasters out, and we would be so, so grateful. Thanks for listening, friends.
Give your children a phone, they say. Right. It'll be fun.
It'll be great.